The wind that morning carried dust sharp as glass. It sliced through the air and made the cottonwoods hiss like they were whispering secrets the plains weren't meant to hear. I was riding the southern fence line, checking posts half buried in sand, when I saw something that didn't belong to the earth. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, just a scrap of hide swaying from a branch. But then the wind shifted, and I saw her feet, bare, still. A woman hanging there beneath the biggest cottonwood in the gulch. Her skin looked pale against the bark, her wrists tied cruelly with rawhide, arms stretched wide as if some cruel god had pinned her there for judgment. I stopped breathing. My horse did too. There was no sound but the wind, the creak of the branch, and the faint rasp of rope rubbing against flesh. The world had gone still, like the prairie itself was holding its breath to see what I'd do. I slid off the saddle, boots sinking into the dry mud. My rifle hung loose in my hand, the old habit of a man who's seen too much of death. I'd spent 10 years avoiding trouble, and now it hung from a tree right in front of me. The closer I got, the worse it looked. Blood ran down her arms, drying into black streaks. Her hair black, thick, was tangled with bark. A bone necklace rested against her collarbone, cracked from the strain of the rope. She was still breathing, but just barely. Each breath was a battle, her chest rising in jerks against the noose around her neck. For a long second, I just stood there, watching, listening, remembering every reason I'd stopped being a soldier, every reason I'd buried my conscience in whiskey and work. Then her eyes opened. They were dark, not the color of fear but of earth after rain, deep, alive, unwilling to die quiet. And that was enough. I cut her down. The rope burned through my palm, dropped her weight into my arms. She was light, too light, bones under skin, and the air filled with dust when I hit the ground with her. She gasped once, twice, then coughed. Blood and dirt spilled from her lips. I loosened the knot around her neck, tore my sleeve and pressed it against the wound. My hands shook. I hadn't touched another living soul in months. "Easy," I muttered. "You're all right now," but I didn't believe it. Out here, all right didn't last. The cottonwood groaned in the wind. Crows circled above, black dots against a bleached sky. I lifted her head onto my knee, feeling her pulse weak, but there. Her eyes flicked open again. She said something in Cheyenne, soft and broken, like the sound of a river under ice. I didn't understand a word, but the tone was clear. "Don't let me die here." I looked around. No footprints but mine, at least not fresh ones. But the way the branches were broken, the churned mud under the roots, told me someone had been here not long ago. Whoever did this wasn't far. I gathered her up. My arms screamed with the effort, but I set her across the saddle, tied her hands gentle to keep her steady, then climbed up behind her. Her head rested against my shoulder. I could feel the heat of her fever already setting in. I turned the horse north toward my cabin by the creek, every hoofbeat echoing like a clock counting down to the next danger. Behind us, a flock of crows took off from the tree, their wings thrashing the silence apart. As we rode, the sun slipped lower, bleeding red through the haze. The prairie stretched endless and empty ahead, no mercy, no promise, just land and the sound of wind. Her breathing steadied a little, then caught. I could feel her shiver through the thin dress, so I pulled my coat around her. She didn't resist. Maybe she didn't even know I was there. My cabin wasn't much, 4 walls, 1 chair, and a stove that smoked when it rained. But it was shelter, and for the first time in years, I found myself riding faster, not for my own sake, but for someone else's. Half a mile from home, I spotted the tracks. Fresh hoofprints, cutting across the dirt road, deep and angry. Someone had come through recently, 3 riders at least. One of them dragged something heavy, the groove of a chain or rope cutting the earth. The woman stirred. "Boone," she whispered. Her voice cracked like a branch underfoot. Boone. The name landed cold. I'd heard it before. Silas Boone, hunter, trapper, and all-around bastard. The kind of man who thought the West was his playground and people his trophies. If she belonged to him, then trouble was already on my trail. The sun dropped behind the ridge as we reached the creek. Shadows swallowed the world. I swung down, carried her inside, and laid her on the cot. The place smelled of dust, horses, and smoke. She fit into that smell too easily, like she'd always belonged in this harsh world. Her wrists were swollen, her throat marked by the rope. I fetched water, cleaned the wounds, then set about cutting the ties from her ankles. Each knot felt like undoing part of a nightmare. By the time I finished, the moon had risen, throwing pale light through the cracks in the wall. She looked less like a victim now, and more like what she truly was, a survivor hanging by a thread. I sat by the fire, staring at her face. There was strength there, hidden under the bruises, a quiet kind of courage that reminded me of old soldiers who never boasted about what they'd seen. I poured whiskey on my hands, then on her wounds. She didn't flinch, just looked at me once, steady and silent. Something passed between us. Not gratitude, not fear. Just an understanding that neither of us asked for this, but both of us were still here. Outside, the wind shifted again. I thought I heard horses far off, faint, cautious, moving slow. Could have been coyotes, could have been Boone. Either way, I knew the peace wouldn't last till dawn. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. Night came down fast, black and heavy, the kind of dark that eats distance and time. The wind died, and the sound that took its place was hooves, too many of them to belong to one man. I'd barely had time to pour water down her throat when I heard it, a whistle cutting through the quiet like a blade. 3 notes, a signal. Boone. He was close. I looked at the woman on the cot. Her eyes were half open, catching the firelight like 2 pieces of obsidian. She knew that sound. Her lips moved, whispering words I couldn't understand, maybe a prayer or a curse. "Can you stand?" I asked. She tried. Her body trembled, but she nodded once. That was all I needed. I grabbed my rifle, slung a blanket around her shoulders, and pushed the door open. The night outside was cold and clear, the stars sharp enough to draw blood. My horse stamped and snorted, sensing danger before I did. Somewhere in the trees, a coyote barked once, then went silent. We didn't speak as I lifted her onto the saddle. Her weight pressed against me, light but real. I could feel the shallow rise of her breath against my chest. The first gunshot cracked the air before I'd even reached the trail. The bullet split the post beside us. Bark flew. My horse reared, nearly throwing us both. I grabbed the reins, kicked hard, and we bolted into the open field. The next shot came from behind, then another. Muzzle flashes tore the dark apart. Boone's men were shouting, their voices high and eager, the kind of men who found joy in fear. "Hold on," I muttered, and felt her hands clutch my coat. The prairie rolled beneath us, grass whipping our legs. The moon was high, pale as bone, showing every rise and hollow like a map meant only for ghosts. I guided the horse through the gullies, toward the dry creek bed that led north. The sound of pursuit grew fainter, swallowed by distance and wind. Minutes turned to miles. When I was sure we weren't being followed, I slowed the horse near a cluster of rocks, shaped like a half-buried hand. We dismounted there, hiding in its shadow. My lungs burned, and the wound in my side one I didn't remember getting throbbed hot beneath my ribs. She slid off the saddle, staggered once, then knelt beside me. Her hands, still trembling, found the wet spot on my shirt. She pressed her palm against it, firm but careful. Her skin was warm. I caught the faint scent of sage and smoke. "Bullet," I said, voice rough. "Just grazed me." She didn't understand the words, but she understood blood. She tore a strip from the hem of her dress, soaked it with water from my canteen, and pressed it to the wound. I hissed, biting down on my knuckle. She didn't flinch. Her eyes were calm, focused the way a healer's should be. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was wind through the dry grass and the quiet murmur of the creek far below. When she finally leaned back, her hands were red with my blood. She looked at them for a moment, then wiped them on the dirt like she was giving something back to the earth. "You got a name?" I asked softly. She blinked, not sure if it was a question or a warning. Then, barely audible, she said, "Nayeli." The word floated between us, fragile and proud. "Nayeli," I repeated. "All right. She nodded once, eyes steady. Then she pointed to my side, frowned, and said something in her tongue that I guessed meant rest. I wanted to tell her there was no rest out here, not for people like us, but the pain made that decision for me. I slumped against the saddlebag, watching her move around the rocks. She was gathering sage, stripping leaves with swift, practiced hands, mixing them with dust and spit until it became a dark paste. Then she came back and smeared it across the wound. It stung like hellfire, but the bleeding slowed. The moon drifted west. The night grew colder. She huddled close, pulling the blanket tight around both of us. I could feel her shaking not from fear, but exhaustion. Her heartbeat thudded through the cloth. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone in the world. We stayed like that till dawn. The first light hit the plains, gold spreading across the grass like fire. My horse nickered softly, restless. The trail behind us was clean, no dust rising, no sound of hooves. Boone hadn't found us yet. When she saw me trying to stand, Nayeli shook her head. "Wait," she said, her English rough, but clear enough. "You hurt." "Been hurt worse," I told her. She didn't smile, just stared at me, eyes half narrowed, like she was weighing the truth in that sentence. Then she said something low and rhythmic, a melody more than words. It wasn't a prayer this time. It sounded like a story. The sun climbed higher, burning the chill from the air. Her song carried over the grass, soft and steady. I didn't understand the meaning, but it filled the silence in a way that words never could. After a while, she stopped, looked at me, and said, "You saved me. Why?" I hesitated. The question hit harder than a bullet. "Because no one else did," I said finally, "and a man's got to draw the line somewhere." She looked away, toward the horizon where the land met the sky. "Boone come back," she said quietly. "He always come back." "I know," I said. "That's why we keep moving." She nodded, her face hardening not in fear, but in resolve. There was steel in her, same as in the land she came from. We rode again that morning, heading north through the Powder Valley. The sun was bright, the wind dry, and the world felt too quiet, like it was waiting for the next shot to be fired. And somewhere behind us, Boone was out there, following the tracks of a horse that carried a wounded man and a woman who refused to die. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. We found the old cabin by accident. It sat crooked at the edge of the Powder River, half eaten by ivy and thyme. The roof sagged in the middle, the porch boards warped like an old man's spine. One shutter dangled loose, creaking whenever the wind changed. A family of crows had claimed the chimney as their fortress. But to me, it looked like a miracle: 4 walls and a roof between us and the open teeth of the prairie. I pushed the door open with my shoulder. It groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Dust lifted from the floorboards, catching the thin light that came through the cracks. Inside was the smell of old wood, cold ash, and forgotten winters. A table stood in the center of the room, one leg shorter than the rest, leaning sideways as if it, too, had lost the will to stand straight. Still, it was shelter. And out here, that was enough. Nayeli lingered in the doorway, framed by the dusk, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, her eyes scanning every shadow. To her, I must have looked no safer than the man who had hurt her, but she stepped inside anyway. That was courage, quiet, simple, the kind that doesn't announce itself. I set my rifle down and said, "You rest, I'll find wood." She didn't answer, but when I came back with an armful of branches, she was already kneeling by the hearth, stacking twigs with a rhythm that seemed older than language. Her hands moved slow and graceful, like she was touching something sacred. When the first spark caught, the light hit her face, a flicker of gold on dark skin, the smoke curling through her hair. The fire painted her in motion, not a victim anymore, but a person still fighting to exist. She looked more alive than she had since I found her. I sat across from her, letting the heat soak into my bones, thawing 10 years of winter that had nothing to do with weather. Outside, the wind howled down the valley, but in here, the air was still. Her presence changed the sound of silence. "You been out here long?" she asked after a while, her voice careful, as if testing whether I'd break it. Too long, I said. Since the war. War, she repeated, shaping the word slowly, like it was something she didn't trust. Yeah, I said. One where nobody wins. She nodded, not looking at me. My people say war never ends. It just moves inside the heart. I looked at her, then really looked. The bruises on her neck were fading, replaced by a quiet strength that had nothing to do with muscles or guns. She was younger than I'd thought, maybe 30, but her eyes, they belonged to someone much older, someone who had already buried too much of herself in the ground. We spent the next hours in silence. I fixed the door. She mended her torn dress with a thread pulled from the lining of her shawl. The world outside moved on: birds, wind, river, none of it caring who lived or died. There was something honest in that indifference. It made the two of us, broken as we were, feel strangely human again. When the night finally took hold, I couldn't sleep. Every time the wind brushed the cabin walls, I heard Boone's voice in it, that lazy drawl, that promise, "You can't hide forever, old man." I reached for my revolver more than once, but the fire's glow kept me still. The sound of Nayeli's breathing filled the room, soft and steady. The way she curled her hands under her chin reminded me of my daughter, the one I'd never had the chance to raise. Sometimes life robs you before you even realize you're losing something. I must have dozed off, because I woke to her singing, low, gentle, half a whisper. The kind of song you hum to the earth to remind it you're still here. It wasn't English, but it didn't need to be. It carried something older: grief, yes, but also endurance. A melody that rose and fell like wind across tall grass. It seeped into the cracks of the walls, into the space between the heartbeats. When she saw me watching, she smiled a faint curve that barely reached her eyes. "Song for healing," she said simply. "For you." "For me?" I asked, half embarrassed. She nodded. "You carry ghosts. I hear them in your sleep." Oh. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that my ghosts had been buried under 10 years of whiskey and silence. But she wasn't wrong, so I said nothing. The fire burned low. I lay there listening to her voice fade, the smoke curling toward the roof like prayers escaping through cracks in heaven. Later, when the sun came up, we went outside together. The frost on the grass glittered like 1,000 tiny mirrors. The river smoked in the cold air. She knelt to drink, cupping water in her hands. I noticed how steady she was, no trembling, no fear, just calm, like she belonged to the land in a way I never could. "You could go east," I said. "Find your people." She shook her head. "They gone north. I don't know if they live." "Then we'll find them," I said. Her eyes met mine. "Why help me?" I thought about it for a long time. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and river clay. "Because you're the first thing I've seen in years that's worth saving." She didn't answer, just looked away, hiding the faintest trace of a smile. It wasn't gratitude, more like recognition. Like she saw the same hunger for redemption I'd tried to drown. We were both running from something we couldn't name. Maybe that was why neither of us asked the other to stop. By midday, I was cutting logs while she cooked what was left of our provisions. The smell of beans and smoke filled the air, mixing with the scent of sage she'd hung to dry near the fire. For a brief, impossible moment, it felt like life before everything went wrong. She hummed while she stirred the pot. Not that same sad tune, something lighter this time. It wound through the air like smoke, soft and fleeting. When she handed me a bowl, our fingers touched a small thing, but it lingered. Her skin was cool, her grip firm, and for the first time in a decade I felt the ache of being alive. I caught myself smiling. That scared me more than Boone ever could. We ate in silence. The fire popped. A hawk screamed somewhere far away. After a while, she leaned back against the wall and said, "You have family?" "Had," I said. "They're all names on a stone now." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Stones can't hurt you." She looked at me, puzzled, then nodded like she understood something I didn't. "But they can remember you," she said softly, "even when you forget yourself." That stayed with me. As dusk fell, the cabin grew dim, the air heavy with smoke and the faint hum of the river outside. She brushed her hair near the firelight, the strands catching gold in the flame. There was a scar along her temple I hadn't noticed before. Thin, pale, like a line drawn by a trembling hand. Without thinking, I asked, "He did that to you?" She paused, then nodded. "Long time ago. You could have killed him," I said. Her eyes flicked to mine. I thought about it, but then I would become him. Oh, there was no bitterness in her tone, just truth. And I realized then that strength wasn't about fighting. It was about knowing when not to. That night, as we sat by the fire again, I asked, "Nayeli, you believe people can change?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "River changes every day," she said. "Still river." I looked into the fire, the sparks rising like stars. "Guess I'm trying to remember how to flow again." She reached across the flames, laid her hand over mine. Her skin was cool, her touch steady. "Then stop fighting the water." Her voice was low but certain, not advice, not comfort, just a truth the world had carved into her. We stayed like that until the wood burned low, the flames shrinking to embers. Outside, the wind had quieted. The crows were silent too, as if the land itself had paused to breathe with us. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of war, or fences, or graves. I dreamed of wind through cottonwoods, of a voice singing in a language older than pain. And somewhere in that dream, I felt the weight I'd carried for so long start to lift, not gone, but lighter. When I woke before dawn, the fire was out. She was standing at the doorway, watching the eastern sky turn pale. I could see her breath in the cold air, curling like smoke. She turned and looked at me. "Sun coming," she said. "Yeah," I answered. "It always does." She smiled faint, but real, and went to fetch water from the river. I sat there, watching the light crawl across the floorboards, thinking maybe, just maybe, the worst parts of me had finally burned away. Outside, the morning was quiet. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled once, and was answered by another. "Hey there, friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. It's easy to forget, but staying hydrated is crucial for your health. Also, if you've been sitting for a while, do a quick lap around the room and give your eyes a break from the screen. Your body will thank you." The first snow came early that year. It fell in thin, mean flakes that stung the skin and melted before they could soften the land. The air smelled of iron and cold wood. By dusk, the Powder River had frozen around the edges, the cottonwoods brittle as glass. The wind had a razor's edge to it, whispering secrets through every crack in the cabin walls. I just finished stacking the last of the logs when I heard the sound I'd been waiting for, the low groan of a saddle, the crunch of hooves on frozen ground. Nayeli looked up from the hearth, her face half lit by the fire. She didn't ask. She knew. Boone had found us. The name itself felt like a sickness crawling up my spine. I moved to the window. 3 riders. Boone in front, the others flanking him like wolves, too scared to lead but too mean to leave. Their horses snorted steam into the cold, their breath ghosting in the blue dusk. Boone sat tall, wrapped in a black coat, a wide grin splitting his beard. Even from a distance, that grin carried the smell of whiskey and cruelty. "Told you, old man." His voice carried through the air, cold and calm. "You can't hide a thing that's mine." I felt Nayeli stiffen behind me. Her breath hitched, but she didn't step back. She was standing now, small against the orange glow of the fire, her shadow long on the wall. Her eyes didn't leave the door. "You stay behind the table," I said quietly. "If they come in, you run." She shook her head once. "No run, not again." The way she said it left no room for argument. The firelight caught the edge of her jaw, and I realized she wasn't afraid, not the way she used to be. There was something else in her now, a kind of stillness before the strike. I checked my revolver. 5 bullets left. The rifle leaned by the door, 1 round chambered. I'd fought worse odds, but never with something to lose. Outside, Boone dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. He took his time, lighting a cigar, like this was just another evening, and he'd come calling on a friend. The glow of the ember flickered across his face. "Ward," he shouted, that mocking drawl echoing through the trees. "You think you can hide a thief and walk away clean? The world doesn't work that way, old man." "Neither does hell," I muttered. The first shot came through the wall, splinters of pine exploding past my ear. I dropped to the floor, rolled behind the stove, and fired back through the crack in the shutters. My bullet took one man's hat clean off. Boone laughed, slow and cruel. "Still got some fight in you, huh? That's good. I like it when they struggle." Another shot tore through the window. The lamp shattered, plunging the room into half dark. The fire still burned, its glow jumping across the walls like a heartbeat gone wild. Nayeli crawled to my side, holding the rifle. Her hands didn't shake. "Here," she said, voice steady. "You need." I looked at her, really looked. The fear was there, yes, but beneath it, something harder. A resolve made of bone and fire. "All right," I said. "We'll end it here." Outside, Boone laughed again, that sound scraping across the ice. "Come on out, Ward. You think that squaw's gonna keep you warm when you're 6 feet under? Step outside, and I'll make it quick." I took a breath, feeling the ache in my ribs, the old wound pulsing with every heartbeat. "He won't quit," I whispered. Nayeli's eyes met mine. "Then we make him stop." The words didn't sound like hers. They sounded like something the land itself had said through her. I kicked the door open. Snow and gunfire met me at once. The first bullet grazed my arm. The second buried itself in the doorframe. The recoil from my revolver sent a shock through my shoulder. I fired twice, hitting the ground near Boone's horse, forcing it to rear and throw him sideways. He cursed, caught himself, and fired back. The third man spurred forward, trying to flank us. I barely had time to aim before the world exploded. The flash of Boone's pistol, the roar of my rifle, and the sudden silence afterward. The man fell from his horse, limbs tangled, his face already losing color against the snow. Boone ducked behind a log, shouting, "You think you can take me, Ward? You're just an old fool playing sheriff in a world that don't care." He wasn't wrong, but I'd made peace with that kind of foolishness. Snow fell thicker now, swirling in the firelight, spilling from the cabin. Nayeli stood at the doorway, the rifle raised in both hands. Her braids swung with the wind, her face streaked with soot. She looked like part of the storm itself, wind and flame in human form. Boone stepped from behind the log, his coat dusted white, his grin still there, a red line of blood seeping through his shoulder. "Drop it, girl," he sneered. "You ain't got the guts." She didn't move. He took a step closer, then another. The snow creaked under his boots, a cruel rhythm counting down to something final. "Nayeli," I said softly. "Now." The gunshot cracked the night open. Bone's grin vanished. His hat flew off, and his hand went to his shoulder. He stumbled, still standing, eyes wide in disbelief. She'd shot him clean through the collarbone. He looked from me to her, and for the first time, the confidence drained out of him. His voice came rough, ragged. "You don't know what you just started." "I finish," she said. He lunged forward, firing blindly. The flash lit up his face, all hate and fury, and I tackled her to the ground as the bullet screamed over our heads and buried itself in the stove. Sparks leapt into the air, catching the curtains. In seconds, the cabin filled with smoke. We crawled toward the door, coughing, half blind. The fire spread fast, wood dry from years of neglect, greedily devouring everything it touched. Boone was still outside, shouting curses, his voice breaking as the blood loss caught up to him. I pushed Nayeli ahead of me, toward the creek bank. The smoke stung my eyes, turned the world into flashes of orange and black. The heat on my back felt like judgment. When we burst into the cold, Boone was there, swaying on his feet, his revolver trembling in his hand. The fire behind us threw his shadow long across the snow, huge and monstrous. "You can't kill me," he spat, voice cracked. "You ain't got the will." "You're right," I said, "but she does." Late. The second shot came from behind me. It hit Boone square in the chest. His body jerked once, twice, then staggered backward. The echo of the shot hung in the air, mingling with the crackle of burning wood. He took 2 steps back, staring at Nayeli, as if she were something not of this world, not a woman, but a reckoning. Then he fell into the snow. The sound he made wasn't human, more like the last breath of a storm giving up the sky. For a long moment, the only thing I could hear was the river, half frozen, whispering under the ice. Nayeli dropped the rifle. Her shoulders shook once, then went still. The snow around Boone's body turned dark. I walked to her, placed a hand on her arm. "It's over," She shook her head slowly. Never over. But maybe lighter. The cabin was burning behind us, the flames licking through the roof, painting the night orange. It looked almost beautiful, like something being purified instead of destroyed. Every beam that fell sounded like the end of a chapter neither of us had chosen to write. I sat down beside her, the pain in my side flaring up again. She pressed her hand there, murmured something in Cheyenne words I didn't know, but I felt them settle deep, like a heartbeat calming another. The warmth of her touch spread through me, chasing away the cold that had lived in my bones for too long. The flames threw light across her face. There were tears in her eyes, yes, but they didn't fall. They just shone there, unspent, like she was too proud to let them go. "You fight for me," she said quietly. "Why?" I smiled, though it hurt. "Because you reminded me I still can." For the first time, she let herself cry. Not loud, just the quiet tears of someone who's run out of walls to hide behind. We stayed there until dawn, watching the cabin burn itself into ash. The night shifted from orange to gray to silver, the river beginning to steam as the frost broke. When the sun finally rose, it caught on the river ice, scattering light across the snow like shards of glass. The world felt clean, quiet, not safe, maybe, but honest. And for the first time since the war, I felt like a man again. Not a soldier, not a ghost, just a man who had chosen to stand between darkness and someone worth saving. If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone, and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. The snow melted fast after Boone died. By the second week, the powder ran high again, brown, swollen, full of mud and memory. Ashes from the cabin drifted downstream like gray feathers, vanishing into the bends of the river. The land thawed the way a wound does, slow, reluctant, but sure. I built a lean-to under the bluff, patching it together from whatever the fire hadn't eaten. 2 good beams, a door without hinges, and a roof of mismatched planks that leaked when the rain came. Nayeli planted sage beside the doorway. She said the spirits liked it that way, so they'd know peace had finally found this place. We didn't talk much in those days. Words had done their part. Now it was silence that carried the meaning, the scrape of my shovel cutting new fence posts, the clink of tin cups in the morning, the soft rustle of her walking through the grass at dawn. I mended fences. She tended a small fire pit, cooking beans and rabbit stew that smelled of earth and smoke. Sometimes she'd hum the same healing song I'd first heard in the cabin. I didn't understand a syllable, but each note stitched something inside me I'd long stopped believing could be mended. At dusk, we'd sit side by side, watching the sun fall behind the bighorns. The light turned everything to gold, even the scars. The world looked the way forgiveness might feel if it ever took shape. She'd point to the horizon and tell stories of her people, how they read the wind, how they buried their dead with the sunrise at their feet so they'd never walk in darkness again. I listened, and for once I didn't feel like a trespasser in someone else's world. One evening she asked, "You miss your home?" I poked the fire with a stick. "Home's a place that stops existing once you leave it." She thought on that for a while, then said, "My people say home follows you if you listen." Huh. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is the only honest reply a man has left. We stayed that way for weeks, moving through a rhythm older than language. I'd ride out to check traps, come back at noon to see her hanging herbs to dry. She'd patch my coat, scold me for bleeding through the bandage, then smile like she didn't mean to. Life had trimmed itself down to the small things: wood smoke, stew, the weight of the wind at night. "You ever think about leaving?" I asked one evening. She smiled, small and tired. "Every day. But where do I go?" "Home," I said. Her eyes softened. "This is home. For now." And maybe that was enough. Days bled into weeks. The horses grew restless, wanting new trails. My side healed slow, the scar tightening like a reminder each time I breathed too deep. I knew the world would come knocking again, lawmen asking questions, bounty hunters sniffing for Boone's debts, or maybe just loneliness returning like it always does. But each morning, when I saw her standing by the river with the wind in her hair and sunlight on her face, I figured maybe some ghosts can be outlasted. Sometimes she'd talk to the river, not in words but in sounds short, quiet murmurs that seemed half prayer, half conversation. Once I asked who she was talking to. She said, "To those who listen." "Who's listening?" She smiled. "Everything." That night I dreamed of voices in the water, of faces I'd lost floating past without blame. When I woke, she was already outside, lighting the morning fire. Then came the morning that changed the air. I woke to find her saddle packed, the blankets folded neat, her few belongings tied with a strip of leather. She was kneeling by the river, tracing patterns in the mud circles within circles, the shape of a journey that never ends. Her eyes were dry, but her hands shook. "You're leaving," I said. She nodded. "Spring comes, my people move with it." The words hit like a slow bullet. I wanted to ask her to stay. The words came up, caught in my throat, and died there. "A man like me doesn't own anything, not land, not time, not people, especially not her." She stood and looked at me. The wind pushed her hair across her face, and she didn't bother to move it. "You saved me, Elias Ward." I shook my head. "No, you saved yourself. I just cut a rope." That made her smile, the kind that reaches deep, where pain turns into something gentler. Then we both did what we must. We spent that day in quiet. She rode out to the ridge once, just to see the distance, then came back. I fixed a strap on her saddle that didn't really need fixing. She cooked a pot of beans neither of us touched. There's a heaviness to goodbyes that no words can lift. At sunset, she mounted her horse, bareback, the way only her kind could ride, quiet, sure, part of the wind itself. I walked beside her until we reached the ridge. From there the whole valley opened wild, endless, waiting. The snowmelt had turned the fields green again. The river glinted like silver thread through a quilt of sage. For a while neither of us spoke. The air smelled of rain and distance. "When the wind changes," she said, "you'll hear my song again." I tipped my hat. "Then I'll be listening." She nodded once, then turned her horse toward the rising Sunday sage, brushed her knees as she rode, her figure shrinking against the sea of grass. The sun rose behind her, painting her shadow long across the land. I stood there a long time, until the dust of her horse's trail faded into light. The air was cool, the earth damp beneath my boots. I breathed deep. The world smelled of rain. Back at the lean-to, I poured the last of the whiskey into the dirt and watched it soak the ground, dark and final. No prayers, no speeches, just a quiet promise to keep living honest, one sunrise at a time. That evening the clouds rolled in, thick and low, and the first drops of rain hit the ashes of the old cabin. They hissed like a sigh from the earth itself. I sat by the river, hat pulled low, watching the water carry the ashes away. Somewhere in that sound I thought I heard her song again, faint, distant, but there. Night fell slow. The stars burned low, the kind of clear that makes a man feel both small and infinite. I thought about all I'd lost, and all I'd somehow been given back. Nayeli was gone, but the silence she left behind wasn't empty. It was full of her song, her courage, her defiance against the darkness. Her spirit hung in the air like the aftertaste of smoke, sharp, real, impossible to forget. I realized then that love wasn't always about staying. Sometimes it was about setting someone free and not following. Maybe that's what freedom really is, not forgetting what hurt you, but choosing to live anyway. The rain stopped before midnight. I fed the fire a single log and watched its reflection ripple across the river. My face in that water looked older, maybe softer. For once I didn't see the soldier or the sinner, just a man who'd been forgiven by time. I leaned back against the bluff, boots crossed, hat over my eyes. The wind carried a faint echo, her voice, maybe, or the river pretending to be kind. Either way, it was enough. The story you've just heard isn't about perfection. It's about two broken souls who met at the edge of the world and reminded each other how to be human again. Elias Ward, a man who built fences to keep pain out. Nayeli, a woman who broke those fences just by surviving. Together, they didn't find love the way stories usually tell it. They found something rarer, trust. And from trust, the courage to walk separate roads without bitterness. Today's story is about pains that seemed to have no way out until a small ray of light changed everything. Do you believe that, even in the darkest times, there's always a miracle waiting at the end of the road? And if deep down you still believe that God is watching over you, quietly arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment, Amen, below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write it, a blessing may quietly find its way into your life.